She called 911 on me, screaming to the dispatcher that I was a dangerous individual, harassing her, potentially armed and barricaded, all because I had the audacity to refuse her entry into my own home for an unscheduled, unauthorized inspection of my living room curtains. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. But what Brenda, in her infinite wisdom and self-importance, didn't know was that the calm, professional voice on the other end of that emergency line, the one patiently listening to her histrionic fabrications, belonged to my wife, Sarah. And Sarah, bless her tactical heart, decided that if Brenda wanted an emergency, she was going to get one she'd never forget. Living in a neighborhood governed by an HOA, especially one as zealous as ours, often feels like tiptoeing through a minefield of arbitrary rules and regulations, each one seemingly designed by someone with too much time on their hands and a desperate need for control. When Sarah and I first moved into the Willow Creek Estates, it seemed idyllic. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes gleaming in the sun, a sense of pristine order that, at first glance, appeared peaceful. We were, perhaps, naive. We soon learned that this order was maintained not by communal respect, but by the iron fist of Brenda McLaughlin, president of the HOA board, and a woman who patrolled the streets like a hawk searching for its next vole-sized infraction. Brenda wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was the architect of many, her interpretations often veering into the realm of the truly bizarre. She was in her late 50s, with a tightly permed helmet of blonde hair that seemed to defy gravity and a wardrobe that consisted exclusively of pastel pantsuits, often accessorized with an HOA-branded lanyard. Even when she was just getting her mail, her power, she believed, was absolute, her judgment infallible. Early on, we'd had minor skirmishes. There was the official warning notice about our garden hose being visible from the street for more than the allotted 3 hours post-watering, complete with a time-stamped photograph. Then came the passive-aggressive email chain about the precise shade of beige. Our new welcome mat was, apparently, it was Sahara Sunset, when the approved palette clearly dictated desert sand, a distinction so minute it would require a spectrograph to confirm. Each interaction was a masterclass in pedantry, leaving us shaking our heads but largely compliant, choosing our battles. The HOA bylaws, a tome thicker than a phone book for a small city, were her scriptures, and she preached from them with fervent conviction, conveniently ignoring sections that didn't suit her agenda or, more often, inventing clauses that simply didn't exist. Her favorite targets were newer residents, those not yet beaten down by her relentless oversight, or those who, like me, occasionally displayed the temerity to question her authority by, say, asking to see the specific rule in writing. This, in Brenda's world, was tantamount to heresy. She had this unnerving habit of peering into windows if she was walking by, not a quick glance, but a full-on, lingering stare, as if she was cataloging your possessions for compliance. She once left a note on our door about a decorative vase visible on our windowsill, claiming it potentially detracted from the aesthetic uniformity of the north-facing window displays. My wife, Sarah, who worked stressful shifts as a 911 dispatcher, often found Brenda's antics to be a source of dark humor, a peculiar sort of comic relief after dealing with actual life-and-death emergencies. "At least my crazies at work have a genuine crisis," she'd say. "Brenda just manufactures hers out of thin air and beige paint swatches. We learned to document everything, to communicate with the HOA primarily through email for a paper trail, and to generally keep our heads down." But Brenda seemed to view our quiet compliance not as respectful neighborliness, but as a challenge, an indication that we were hiding something truly egregious, like an unapproved pet alligator or an underground disco. Her intrusions were becoming more frequent, her inspections more bold. She'd taken to casually strolling onto people's porches to examine potted plants or to test the structural integrity of their railings with a firm shake. Most neighbors just sighed and let her, too weary to fight, but her obsession with our home, for some reason, seemed to intensify. Perhaps it was because I'd once politely but firmly corrected her during an HOA meeting when she claimed the association owned the first 5 feet of everyone's driveway. I had simply pointed to the relevant section of the covenants, which clearly stated otherwise. The look she gave me could have curdled milk from 50 paces. It was after this that her random checks on our property seemed to escalate. This latest fixation, the one that led to the now infamous 911 call, was supposedly about ensuring all homes were adhering to an unwritten, verbally communicated internal ambiance standard, a concept so nebulous and unenforceable it was laughable. She'd decided, apparently, that our living room curtains, glimpsed fleetingly through the window, were potentially non-compliant with seasonal decorative mandates. It was Tuesday morning, my day off, and I was enjoying a rare, quiet cup of coffee, blissfully unaware that Hurricane Brenda was about to make landfall on my doorstep. The doorbell rang with an insistent, almost aggressive sharpness that immediately set my teeth on edge. I wasn't expecting anyone, and there's a particular kind of dread that accompanies an unexpected ring when you live under HOA surveillance. Peeking through the peephole, I confirmed my suspicions. Brenda McLaughlin standing ramrod straight, clipboard in hand, a look of grim determination etched onto her face. She was wearing a particularly offensive shade of mint green pantsuit today, a color that seemed to vibrate with righteous indignation. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and opened the door. "Brenda," I greeted, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her eyes, small and suspicious, flicked past me, trying to get a view into the house. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I'm here for the scheduled interior ambiance compliance check." Scheduled by whom? I certainly hadn't scheduled anything, nor had I received any official notification, which, even by her own convoluted rules, was usually required. "I'm sorry, Brenda, but I'm not aware of any scheduled check," I replied calmly. "And frankly, I'm a little busy right now." This was, in fact, true. My coffee was getting cold. "This is an official HOA matter, Mr. Harrison," she retorted, puffing up slightly. "All residents are required to cooperate. I need to inspect your primary living space, specifically the window treatments and general decorative cohesion." She actually said, decorative cohesion. I had to physically restrain a laugh. "Brenda," I said, leaning against the doorframe, making it clear she wasn't getting past me, "I appreciate your dedication to cohesion. However, unless you have a warrant signed by a judge or can show me a specific bylaw that grants you unsolicited access to the inside of my home, you're not coming in. This is private property." I was polite but firm. I knew my rights, and more importantly, I knew the HOA bylaws better than she thought. There was no such provision for random interior inspections without resident consent or serious cause like a visible structural hazard. Her face tightened, the mint green of her suit seeming to deepen with her displeasure. "Are you refusing an official HOA inspection, Mr. Harrison?" Her voice took on a dangerous edge. "That's a serious violation," I shrugged. "I'm refusing to let a stranger into my home without proper cause or authorization, Brenda. There's a difference." The conversation, if you could call it that, continued in this vein for several minutes. She insisted it was her right, her duty. I calmly repeated my stance. Her arguments became increasingly circular and illogical. She claimed she'd received an anonymous complaint about our curtains. Knowing our immediate neighbors, who were lovely and equally weary of Brenda's antics, I highly doubted this. "A complaint about what exactly, Brenda? That they're too curtainy?" I asked, a hint of sarcasm finally seeping through. This was clearly the wrong approach. Sarcasm was like fuel to her fire. "They appeared to be of an unapproved texture in the afternoon sun," she snapped, actually tapping her clipboard for emphasis as if it contained sworn affidavits from fabric experts. "And I have reason to believe you may be using unapproved curtain rod finials." Finials. She was really going there. My patience, normally quite robust, was wearing thin. "Brenda, with all due respect, you're not seeing my finials." You're not seeing my curtains up close. You're not coming into my house today. If you wish to pursue this, please send me an official letter citing the specific bylaw you believe I'm violating, and I'll have my lawyer review it." The word lawyer seemed to make her twitch. "This is obstruction," she declared, her voice rising in pitch. "You are harassing an official representative of the Homeowners Association in the performance of her duties. I am feeling threatened by your aggressive posture." I hadn't moved from leaning against the doorframe. If anything, I was the picture of a relaxed, albeit annoyed, homeowner. Threatened? "Brenda, I'm standing on my own property, asking you to respect my privacy. The only one being aggressive here is you, demanding entry into my home without any legal basis." It was then that she uttered the fateful words, her eyes glittering with a vindictive sort of triumph. "Well, Mr. Harrison, if you're going to be uncooperative and hostile, I have no choice but to call the authorities. We'll see what they have to say about your behavior." She whipped out her phone with a flourish, her thumb jabbing at the screen. A small, wicked part of me, knowing Sarah was very likely working the dispatch desk this morning, almost wanted her to. "Go right ahead, Brenda," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Call them. Explain to them that you're demanding to inspect my curtain finials and that I'm harassing you by politely declining on my own property." Her face contorted with rage. "Oh, I will. And I'll tell them you're dangerous. You wouldn't want your neighbors to think you're some kind of troublemaker, would you?" She held the phone to her ear, her glare fixed on me, waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to throw open my doors and beg her to inspect every lampshade and throw pillow. I just looked back, my expression unreadable, and waited. The battle lines were drawn. The curtains, and indeed the finials, were about to become the least of her concerns. I watched as Brenda, her face a mask of self-righteous fury, dramatically turned her back to me, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in loud, urgent tones. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood in my doorway, but phrases like uncooperative resident, refusing entry, aggressive demeanor, and feeling unsafe drifted back to me, punctuated by her indignant gasps. I could only imagine the story she was weaving for the unfortunate soul on the other end of that line. A wry smile touched my lips as I pictured Sarah, sitting at her console, probably mid-sip of her own lukewarm coffee, suddenly recognizing the address, or, even more deliciously, Brenda's distinctive, shrill voice. Later that evening, Sarah recounted the initial call with gleeful precision, and it was even better than I had imagined. Brenda, it turned out, didn't just call 911. She launched into a full-blown Academy Award, worthy performance of a damsel in deep, imminent distress. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah had answered, her voice the epitome of calm professionalism. Yes, this is Brenda McLaughlin, HOA president at Willow Creek Estates. Brenda shrieked, apparently bypassing any preamble. I am being harassed and threatened by a resident at 125 Willow Creek Drive. He's refusing to comply with HOA regulations and is acting very erratically. I need police assistance immediately. Sarah, recognizing our address instantly, had to mute her microphone for a split second to stifle a chuckle. She typed our address into the system, a little green light confirming it as our home. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, starting an incident log. Okay, Miss McLaughlin, Sarah said, her tone perfectly even, betraying none of her amusement. Can you tell me exactly how he is harassing and threatening you? He won't let me in his house, Brenda practically screeched. I'm here for an official inspection, and he's blocking the door. He's being incredibly hostile, and I'm genuinely concerned for my safety. He might be unstable. Sarah, ever the professional, continued with the standard questions, though each one must have felt like setting up a punchline. Ma'am, is he verbally threatening you? Does he have any weapons? Are you in immediate physical danger? According to Sarah, Brenda hesitated for a moment, likely realizing that he won't let me inspect his drapes didn't quite sound like a life-threatening emergency. Well, he's being verbally obstructive, Brenda decided, and his tone is very menacing. As for weapons, I can't see any, but who knows what he has in there. People like him, these rule breakers, they can be very unpredictable. I demand a police presence." Sarah calmly explained, "Ma'am, refusing entry for an HOA matter is generally a civil issue, not a police emergency, unless there are specific threats or acts of violence." Oh, this was rich. Sarah was using her official procedure voice, the one that could de-escalate a riot or, in this case, subtly lead Brenda further down the rabbit hole. "But he's harassing me," Brenda insisted, her voice cracking with frustration. "I am an officer of the HOA. His refusal is a direct challenge to community order. It's societal breakdown in miniature." Sarah could hear the rustling of Brenda's clipboard through the phone. "I understand you're upset, Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah continued, her voice radiating soothing, bureaucratic empathy. "We will, of course, document your concerns. Can you describe his menacing tone more specifically? What exactly did he say that made you feel threatened?" This, Sarah told me, led to a rambling diatribe from Brenda about how my calm refusal was itself a form of aggression, and how my failure to submit to a legitimate inspection was indicative of a deeper, more sinister nonconformity. She accused me of harboring unapproved window treatments, with the same gravity one might use to report a bomb threat. Sarah patiently listened, meticulously typing Brenda's increasingly outlandish claims into the dispatch log. "All right, Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah said after Brenda finally paused for breath. "We are taking your report very seriously. Units are being apprised of the situation in your area." She used careful, non-committal language. She hadn't actually dispatched anyone yet, but she let Brenda believe that the wheels of justice were slowly beginning to turn. From my vantage point, I saw Brenda lower her phone, a smirk of triumph playing on her lips. She shot me a look that clearly said, "You're in for it now." I just leaned a little more comfortably against my doorframe. The initial wave of annoyance was being replaced by a growing sense of amusement and anticipation. My wife was a professional, a damn good one, but she also had a finely tuned sense of justice and a very low tolerance for bullies who abuse systems. Brenda had just handed her the perfect opportunity to teach a masterclass in consequences. The beauty of it was that Sarah wouldn't have to break a single rule or procedure to do it. She'd just have to give Brenda exactly what she was, in her escalating panic, about to ask for. Brenda's smirk didn't last long. After about 10 minutes of her pacing my front walkway like a caged leopard, occasionally glaring at my front door as if expecting it to spontaneously combust from the sheer force of her disapproval, she started to look agitated. No sirens, no flashing lights, no stern-faced officers arriving to validate her authority. She pulled out her phone again, her thumb mashing the screen with renewed fervor. I could practically feel the waves of indignation rolling off her. Back at the dispatch center, Sarah told me later, the redial lit up on her console almost immediately. 911. "What is your emergency?" Sarah answered, already knowing who it was. "It's Brenda McLaughlin again," came the shriek. "Where are your officers? This man is still here, still refusing entry." "He's probably destroying evidence of his violations right now." He looked out the window and laughed at me. "This is intolerable." I had, admittedly, peeked through the blinds a moment before, mostly out of curiosity to see if she was still there, and perhaps a small, involuntary smile had indeed crossed my face at the sheer absurdity of the situation. It certainly wasn't a malicious laugh, more of a, "Can you believe this is my life?" kind of chuckle. Brenda, however, interpreted it as a profound personal insult, and a sign of my burgeoning villainy. "Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah said, her voice still a beacon of professional calm, "as I mentioned, officer availability can vary, and calls are prioritized based on immediate threat to life or property. We have your report documented." This, of course, was not what Brenda wanted to hear. Documented. She wanted action. She wanted handcuffs and perp walks. She wanted validation. "Prioritized?" Brenda screeched. "I am an HOA president. This is a direct affront to community governance. Do you understand the precedent this sets? If he gets away with this, no one will respect the rules. It'll be anarchy. Flower beds will go untended. Mailboxes will be non-regulation colors. It'll be chaos. Sarah, ever patient, replied, "Ma'am, I understand your position within the community, but the police department operates under state law and municipal codes. Refusal to allow an HOA inspection for curtain rods doesn't typically rise to the level of immediate police intervention unless there are aggravating circumstances." This was the verbal equivalent of poking a hornet's nest with a stick. Brenda exploded. "Aggravating circumstances? I'll give you aggravating circumstances. This man, Harrison, he's got a very shifty look about him. He could be dangerous. I don't know what he's capable of. For all I know, he's got an arsenal in there. He's barricaded himself. You need to send a SWAT team. I don't feel safe." "My life could be in danger." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "SWAT team? For a curtain inspection?" This was escalating beautifully. "A SWAT team, ma'am," Sarah clarified, ensuring the recording picked up the request clearly. "Are you stating you believe he is armed and poses a significant, immediate threat requiring specialized tactical units?" Brenda, caught up in her own drama, doubled down. "Yes, absolutely. He's clearly unhinged. You can't be too careful these days. He could have anything in that house. And I'm trapped out here. I'm practically a hostage to his non-compliance. I think I need an airlift. I'm feeling faint. The stress is overwhelming. He's creating a hostile environment that could trigger a medical episode for me. Yes, an airlift and special forces. That's what's needed here. This is a serious threat to public order and, frankly, to my continued existence." Sarah had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing out loud. An airlift? Special forces? Because of window finials and a perceived shifty look. Brenda had truly outdone herself. She was no longer just a petty tyrant. She was a delusional one. "All right, Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new note of gravity that was entirely genuine, though perhaps not for the reasons Brenda imagined. "You are now stating that you believe the resident is potentially armed, has barricaded himself, poses a threat requiring tactical intervention, and that you require medical extraction due to the severe stress of the situation. Is that correct?" "Yes, exactly. Finally, someone who understands the gravity," Brenda exclaimed, oblivious to the trap she was so enthusiastically setting for herself. "Send everyone. Spare no expense. This menace needs to be dealt with, and I need to be rescued from this suburban siege." "Okay, Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah confirmed, her fingers flying across the keyboard, updating the call notes with meticulous detail, highlighting keywords like armed, barricaded, SWAT, special forces, airlift, medical emergency, stress-induced. Based on your updated assessment of the escalating threat and your request for specialized units and medical assistance, we will now dispatch the appropriate resources. Please remain on the line if possible and stay in a safe location." Sarah then, with a serene smile, began the process. She conferenced with her supervisor, relaying Brenda's precise words and fears. "Caller is adamant about SWAT, special forces, possible barricaded subject, and is requesting an airlift for herself due to stress," Sarah stated, reading from her notes. The supervisor, after a moment of stunned silence, likely looked at the call history, saw it was a civil dispute originally, and then at the updated information which now, thanks to Brenda's own embellishments, painted a picture of a potential major incident. Standard operating procedure for such claims, especially with a caller insisting on that level of threat, was to err on the side of caution and dispatch a significant response, then downgrade if necessary, once units were on scene. But Sarah, knowing the full context, simply let the procedure unfold as per Brenda's own dramatic script. The appropriate resources were about to descend on Willow Creek Estates, and Brenda was about to get the emergency she so desperately craved, just not in the way she envisioned. The first indication I had that Sarah had truly taken Brenda at her word, or rather at her increasingly unhinged series of demands, was a distant siren. Just one, at first, growing steadily louder. Brenda, who was still pacing my lawn, phone clutched to her chest like a religious relic, perked up immediately. A look of grim satisfaction spread across her face. "See?" she mouthed at my window, though I hadn't moved. "They take my safety seriously." Then another siren joined the first, then a third. The chorus grew, an urban symphony of impending officialdom. My quiet suburban street, usually only disturbed by the hum of lawnmowers or the occasional ice cream truck, was rapidly turning into the focal point of a major emergency response. First, 2 police cruisers screamed around the corner, lights flashing, and pulled up diagonally across the street, effectively blocking traffic. Officers emerged, hands on their holsters, assessing the scene. Brenda, now practically vibrating with vindication, started waving at them frantically, pointing at my house. "He's in there! He's the dangerous one!" she yelled, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. Before those officers could even make their way towards her, another cruiser arrived, then a larger police SUV, the kind they usually reserved for supervisors or tactical gear. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, started to appear on their porches and sidewalks, their faces a mixture of alarm and confusion. Mrs. Pline Henderson from across the street, a sweet, elderly lady who baked us cookies when we moved in, looked particularly distressed. Then came the low, rhythmic whump 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 that could only mean one thing. I looked up, and sure enough, a news helicopter. No, wait, that was a police helicopter, circling low overhead, its downdraft rustling the leaves on the trees and sending Brenda's carefully sculpted hair into a frenzy. A searchlight briefly panned across my front yard before moving to illuminate the general area. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. Brenda was ecstatic. She was practically preening. This, in her mind, was the ultimate validation. The cavalry had arrived, not just cavalry, but air support. She was clearly envisioning her triumphant recounting of this at the next HOA meeting, detailing how her bravery and quick thinking had neutralized a major threat to Willow Creek Estates. Several more officers were now on scene, fanning out, taking positions. Some were speaking into their radios, others were attempting to approach Brenda, who was trying to direct the operation like a general deploying her troops. "Secure the perimeter," she commanded, gesturing vaguely towards my prize-winning azaleas. "He could try to escape through the back. He's cunning." A fire truck, siren wailing, then rumbled up the street, parking a little way down. Not because there was a fire, as Sarah later explained, but because in a potential barricaded subject with unknown threats scenario, EMS and fire are often staged nearby for scene safety, medical standby, and potential breaching assistance if ordered. Breaching assistance? For curtain finials, the absurdity was reaching epic proportions. 2 paramedics also emerged from an ambulance that had quietly pulled up, looking around with an air of, "What fresh madness is this?" I decided it was probably a good time to step outside, hands clearly visible, before they actually considered sending in a battering ram for my unapproved curtains. I opened my front door slowly and stepped onto the porch, holding my hands up, palms open. "Officers," I called out calmly. "I'm the resident here, Mark Harrison. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding." One of the more senior-looking officers, a sergeant by his insignia, approached cautiously, his partner covering him. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance, a potentially hostile individual, possibly armed." "That you?" he asked, his eyes assessing me. "That would be me, according to Ms. McLaughlin over there," I said, gesturing with my head towards Brenda, who was now trying to argue with another officer, insisting they needed to storm the residence. "The only hostility, Sergeant," I continued, "was my refusal to allow her to enter my home without cause to inspect my curtains." She then called 911. The sergeant looked from me to Brenda, then back to me. A flicker of something, exasperation, understanding, crossed his face. "Curtains, sir? And apparently my curtain rod finials are also a point of major contention," I added. "She also claimed you were barricaded and requested special forces and an airlift for herself." Another officer, who had joined the sergeant, chimed in, reading from a notepad. He sounded like he was trying very hard not to smile. I just spread my hands. "As you can see, No barricades. Just me, my coffee, and allegedly non-compliant window treatments. The sergeant sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked over at Brenda, who was now gesticulating wildly, her voice rising as she demanded to speak to whoever was in charge of this woefully inadequate response. The sheer scale of the deployment, the multiple police cars, the fire truck, the ambulance, the freaking helicopter circling overhead, was now beginning to look less like a testament to Brenda's importance and more like a monumental overreaction to Brenda. The neighbors were watching, mouths agape. The focus was slowly but surely shifting from the dangerous resident to the increasingly unhinged-looking HOA president, demanding a special forces team to deal with a decorating dispute. The grand arrival was complete, and Brenda, basking in the glow of a dozen flashing emergency lights, was about to have her spotlight moment, just not the one she'd anticipated. The initial tension from the officers began to dissipate remarkably quickly once I calmly explained the situation, sticking to the facts. Brenda's unannounced demand for an interior inspection, my refusal based on property rights, and her subsequent escalating 911 calls. I offered to show them the HOA bylaws, which contained no provision for such inspections, and even invited them in, ironically, to see the utterly non-threatening nature of my living room. The sergeant politely declined the interior tour, but he did take a cursory look from the doorway, noting the distinct lack of barricades, weapons, or any sign of a struggle, hostage situation, or societal breakdown in miniature. His radio crackled, and he had a brief, quiet conversation, likely with dispatch, or rather, with Sarah, who would have been feeding him the relevant details, including transcripts of Brenda's increasingly hysterical demands. His gaze shifted towards Brenda, who was still haranguing a younger officer, insisting they hadn't secured the scene properly, and that I was clearly a master of deception. The sergeant walked over to her, his expression now one of stern professionalism. "Ms. McLaughlin," he began, his voice firm but controlled, cutting through her tirade. "We need to discuss the nature of your 911 calls." Brenda beamed, puffing up. "Yes, Sergeant, thank you. It's about time someone took charge. This man," she pointed at me dramatically, "is a menace." "Ma'am," the sergeant interrupted, "based on our assessment, there is no criminal offense being committed by Mr. Harrison. This is a civil disagreement regarding HOA rules. There is no evidence of him being armed, no barricade, and certainly no need for a tactical response or an airlift." Brenda's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving her mint green pantsuit looking even more lurid. But I felt threatened. He was hostile. I demanded a proper response. I specifically requested special forces. "Ma'am," another officer joined in, holding a small printout which I suspected was a preliminary cost estimate for the deployed resources. "You initiated a significant emergency response, including multiple police units, fire department standby, EMS, and air support, based on claims that appear to be unsubstantiated." The word unsubstantiated hung in the air. The fire chief, who had strolled over, added, "That helicopter time isn't cheap, ma'am. Nor is pulling a ladder truck and a full crew off their regular duties for a non-emergency." Brenda looked utterly bewildered. "But it was an emergency. I told the dispatcher." She understood. Oh, Sarah understood all right. She understood how to give someone enough rope. "The dispatcher," the sergeant said, his eyes glinting slightly, "recorded your specific request for a SWAT team, special forces, and medical airlift due to the severe stress and danger you perceived. Under city and county ordinances, initiating a false emergency report, especially one that ties up this level of resources, carries significant penalties. This includes full cost recovery for all deployed assets." Brenda sputtered. "False report? But I was scared. He wouldn't let me see his finials. It's against the rules." One of the paramedics, who had been patiently standing by, chimed in dryly, "Ma'am, your vitals seem perfectly stable. No indication of fainting or needing an airlift for stress." Though the bill might actually make you feel faint, the full weight of what she had done began to dawn on Brenda. The triumphant expression was replaced by one of dawning horror. The neighbors were still watching, no longer with alarm, but with a kind of fascinated, slightly horrified amusement. Whispers were starting to ripple through the small crowd. "She called all this for curtains?" I heard Mrs. Henderson murmur to her husband, who was shaking his head. The reckoning had truly begun. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was spectacular. Brenda was formally cited for misuse of emergency services and filing a false report. The city council, who had recently enacted stricter penalties for such abuses after a string of swatting incidents, made an example of her. The bill she received was staggering. Sarah, with meticulous professionalism, had ensured every single cost was itemized: person, hours for each officer, vehicle mileage, fuel for the helicopter, which, as the fire chief noted, burned through it at an alarming rate, administrative fees for processing the false alarm, even the cost of the paramedic unit that had been on standby. It totaled well into the 5 figures. Brenda apparently tried to argue it, tried to claim she was the victim, but the recordings of her 911 calls, especially her increasingly wild demands, were irrefutable. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Faced with the public humiliation, the city fines, and the potential for the HOA's own insurance rates to skyrocket due to her actions, Brenda was unanimously voted out as president. They even initiated proceedings to have her personally cover any costs the HOA might incur as a result of her fiasco. The Willow Creek Estates HOA internal ambiance compliance mandate was never spoken of again. Our curtains and finials remained blissfully uninspected. Sarah and I watched it all unfold with a quiet sense of vindication. She never once broke protocol. She simply facilitated Brenda's own self-destruction by giving her exactly what she insisted she needed. The best part was knowing Brenda knew, or at least suspected, who that calm dispatcher had been, but could never prove any malicious intent on Sarah's part. Sarah had simply been an exemplary professional, responding to a citizen's stated fears and requests with utmost seriousness. And so, life in Willow Creek Estates returned to a new kind of normal, one significantly less oppressed by the shadow of Brenda McLaughlin's clipboard. People started planting slightly more diverse flowers. Our welcome mat remained defiantly Sahara Sunset, and I even installed some rather flamboyant, unapproved, and utterly delightful new curtain rod finials, just because I could. If you're dealing with an out-of-control HOA Karen of your own, remember this story, and maybe, just maybe, remind them that when you dial 911, you better be sure you actually have an emergency, because you never know who might be on the other end of the line, ready to professionally and efficiently give you exactly what you ask for. Drop a comment if you've ever seen an HOA go completely off the rails. I'd love to hear. I'm not alone.